Good evening. Today we are talking about population ecology. This is part 2 of our ecology lectures. So, population, first of all, let's describe what that means. That means that we're talking about a group of individuals of a single species that is occupying the same general area. So, a population of people living in Phelan, a population of people living in Victorville, a population of snake living in your backyard, a population of flies living in your backyard, a population of rabbits living in your backyard. Those would be a single species. Now, remember, those different populations, they make up communities, and that'll be part 3 of our lecture, okay? So populations rely on the same resources. They are influenced by the same environmental factors, and they're likely to interact and breed with one another. So in population ecology, we're dealing with changes in population size. We're looking at the number of individuals coming into a population, the number of individuals leaving a population. So those individuals that are coming into a population may come in through birth, or they may come in through immigration. Those that are leaving a population may emigrate out, E for exiting, or they may pass away. Now, one of the ways, and I kind of mentioned that just a second ago, to keep immigration versus emigration separate is the one that starts with I means that they are coming into a population. Emigration, or that one was starting with the letter E, those are exiting or leaving a population. So this is going to consider the factors that regulate population and population sizes over a period of time. So if we look at population density, density refers to how much something is in one place. For example, LA is way more populated than Phelan. That means that let's take a mile square. The number of people in a mile square in LA is going to be significantly different than the number of people that are in a mile square in Phelan. In Phelan, we might find just one family in a mile square. There might be, 5 people in that family. If we go to the same mile square and go to LA, we've got high-rise buildings, and I don't know how many people live in there, but we could talk maybe a couple hundred. So here in this picture, we're looking at an example of differences in density. For example, these that are dark green are much more densely populated than those areas that are light green. So ecologists use a variety of sampling techniques in order to estimate the density of a population. One of the methods that they use is what is called capture, mark, and recapture. So basically what they do is, for example, they may on day 1 capture all of these 10 individuals here. They will tag those 10 individuals, they will release them, and then on day 2, they may go back out and capture 10 more tortoises or turtles here and count them up. And you can see that they caught 5 of those original 10 in the second day. Therefore, they can estimate that this population size is double, or that there are 20 individuals in this population. In many studies, it is impossible to count all of the individuals in a population. So we will use these variety of measures to kind of estimate the number of individuals that are in that population. So within a population's geographic range, local densities can vary greatly. So they may look at the dispersion patterns of a population, and this refers to the way in which these individuals are spaced out in a particular area. So one of those types of dispersion patterns is what we refer to as clumped. And in this case, what we're looking at is we're looking at a clump of sea stars that are all grouped in this one particular patch. And if we were to move over in this area a ways, we may see another patch, we may see another patch, and so on. And so these organisms are clumped, or forming these various clumps or patches of groups. Now, some of you may have been to the beach, like these people here, and we tend to disperse ourselves out uniformly on the beach. We walk down and we kind of like pick our spot and we go, okay, so we're about this far from that person, that far from that person, that far from that group, and we plot ourselves down. We don't generally put ourselves right next to another family unless we want some really dirty looks, right? So in a dispersion pattern that is uniform, individuals are equally spaced out in the environment. In a random dispersion pattern, individuals are randomly dispersed in an unpredictable manner, and this might be due to the random dispersion of seeds that are blown over an area. And so in this case, if we look at this pattern, there really is no pattern, and that would be random. All right, so we're going to look at some life tables here. Life tables are used for tracking survivorship. So we're looking at the number of individuals that are coming into a population, and then we're looking at the number of individuals that are surviving in that population. So in this survivorship table, we can look at, there are age intervals here. We can look at the number of individuals at a start age. So in this population, there were 100,000 individuals that were born and that made it to age 10. The number of individuals that died during that duration were 833. So about 99% of that population survived. If we fast forward to between 40 and 50 years old, we see that, we start out that age range at about 96,000. 2,640 individuals did not make it, and we can see that there's a survivorship rate of about 97%. Now we get down here to 80 and 90 years old, we see that, half of that population survived here, and the number of individuals that have passed away at that age range, only 40%. You have about a 40% survival rate between if you've made it to the ages of 80 or 90. All right, so let's look, I guess I can leave myself right here. Let's look at survivorship curves. Survivorship curves, what they do is they plot the proportion of individuals from the initial population and the number of individuals that are alive at each age. And there's three main types of survivorship curves. There's type 1, type 2, and type 3. And looking at this graph, you can see this is how many individuals are born, and then this is how many individuals survive to a certain age. And then these kind of are these individuals here represent the average lifespan of this population. So, sorry, I hit the button. So in this case, what we see is the percentage of survivors. So if you are talking the human population, we have a type 1 survivorship curve in which we give birth to like 1 or 2 offspring, and they generally have a 100% survival rate. We don't really have, at least not in the United States, most of our babies survive. And they survive until about 70, 75, and then we all of a sudden see a huge drop off, and we do not see very many people over the age of 100. Now, in a survivorship curve, and so I should also mention, in a type 1 survivorship curve, one of the reasons why there is a high survival rate is because this is a population of organisms in which, when we give birth, we take care of our young, and we, take care of them for 18, 20, 26 years. I don't know. And then they, survive their adulthood. Now, if we look at, let's go to survivorship curve 3. In survivorship curve 3, this would be a population where they have a lot of offspring, and then a lot of those offspring don't make it. So very quick death rate here, in which very few survive. And in this case, they're surviving 20 years, 30 years, and then that's it. They're done. But you can see this would be like fish populations. This would be, this is a mussel. So it might be a mussel population. This could be flies, something where they have a lot of offspring, but most of the offspring don't survive. In the survivorship curve 2, you may also have a lot of offspring. You're not generally taking care of your offspring, or you're taking care of your offspring for a very short period of time, couple months. And what happens is we see a very gradual death rate in which the majority of the population, or half the population, is expired, in this case at about 50 years, and then the other half die off gradually to where there's nothing left at 100 years. So squirrels would be an example of that population. All right, so when we talk about a exponential growth rate, we are talking about a situation in which the population is doubling over time. So in this case, the rate of the population is increasing under ideal conditions. It is, again, doubling over a period of time. It eventually, what will happen in most populations is it will reach what is called carrying capacity. And that basically means that the number of resources that are available in that population aren't adequate anymore. And so we will see this growth rate change. So when it says eventually one or more limiting factors will restrict population growth, these limiting factors we're talking about could be water, could be food, could be shelter. What else limits our ability to survive? Water, food, shelter, nutrition, climate. Okay, those would all be, it could be a storm even. If you're living in an area where maybe you're prone to tsunamis wiping out entire populations every couple years, that could be a limiting factor. So carrying capacity, I mentioned that on the last slide. This is the maximum population size a particular environment can sustain because of these limiting factors. And so what happens is if you are growing exponentially, and this is also sometimes referred to as the J curve, it looks like a J, then what happens is if you reach carrying capacity, you do not have enough resources in your environment for that population to still continue growing exponentially. And so what happens is, you end up with what is referred to as logistical growth. I need to keep my finger off the mouse. So logistical growth, and that looks more like an S curve. So what ends up happening is the population reaches carrying capacity, and then we have a number of individuals that die because carrying capacity cannot support them. And then as resources, maybe it's spring and the flowers come up again. And so your population has the food it needs to survive. So we may see that population come back. And then summertime, when all the food sources go away, we may see that population decline again. And so that's carrying capacity and the difference between exponential and logistical growth. Okay, so those limits on population growth. Logistic growth models predict that population growth will slow and eventually stop as population density increases. Resources are not unlimited. Resources at some point in time may expire, be used all up, and not available for everybody in that population. At higher population densities, density-dependent rates result in declining births, or they result in the number of individuals that die in that population. So, what are some of the causes of density-dependent death rates? It might be competition between individuals of the same species for those limited resources. Let's say that you are in the Arctic area and you only find one caribou. Well, if you're sharing it among what's a group of dogs called? Your herd? I know it has another name, but It escapes me at the moment. Sorry. So anyway, if you only have one to share with your group, then somebody's going to starve potentially, or somebody's not going to get enough to support their metabolism. Or you may be fighting and say, no, I made the kill. You can't have any. Sounds familiar, right? So limiting factors may include food. It may include shelter or your nesting sites, and it may include nutrition. So those are density dependent factors. Density independent factors are totally unrelated to the density of a population. It doesn't matter, and there's no thought, there's no plan involved in the number of people or the number of individuals in a population that are in this particular area. So for example, a lot of people go, well, why do tornadoes, or I should say hurricanes, always hit New Orleans? Why do tornadoes always hit down in the most populated city in Oklahoma? Well, that has more to do with climate and latitude, longitude than anything to do with the number of people that live in that area. Why do we have large populations of organisms living in some of those areas? Well, because climate is good. They can grow the food they need, they have the shelter they need, and so on. But they may be prone to these other non-controllable events like fires, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. Um, Density independent factors could also include habitat destruction by human activity, that deforestation or tearing down of trees to build more shelter or to build more factories or whatever we're doing with it. Seasonal changes in weather can also affect populations. However, they are unrelated to the number of individuals that are in that population. So density dependent factors, effects on the size or the growth of the population, vary according to the number of individuals in that population. And the limiting factors that are, come into play during density dependent is, again, the availability of food, predation, competition, disease, migration. I mean, think about disease. The more populated a city is, the more likely it is for a disease to have a huge effect. That's one of the reasons why many epidemiologists were promoting the idea of flattening the curve, especially in large cities like LA, New York, because those are areas where there is a high density of individuals, and that disease is more likely to affect more individuals in that population. This is what we refer to as the boom and bust cycle. And I was kind of mentioning this on the previous slide as we were talking about that exponential growth. And as it reaches carrying capacity, it moves into logistic growth. And so what we see here is on the upswing, we see exponential growth. The blue is for snowshoe hares and the red is for lynx. So these are the snowshoe hares and these are the lynx. And what's represented here is the lynx are obviously depending upon the snowshoe hare for nutrition. So as we see the snowshoe hare population increase, we see the snowshoe hare population increase. What do we see right behind it? We see the lynx population increase. But as the lynx population increases, what happens to the hare population? It decreases. Again, we see here the snowshoe hare population rapidly increased here, and very shortly thereafter, we saw the lynx population increase. But as the lynx population increases, what happened to the horseshoe hare population? It decreased. And so what's happened is as each of those populations reach carrying capacity, we see death rate increase. But as resources become available again, in this case, the snowshoe hare made a comeback, we see the lynx population increase their numbers. So this boom or bust cycle may be due to food shortages, or it could be due to these predator and prey interactions. So some populations are going to fluctuate depending upon the density of individuals in another population. So using radio collars is another way in which ecologists can track populations of organisms and determine what's going on. So in some populations, ecologists may attach radio collars. In this case, they used radio collars to track individual hares. And what they discovered was that 90% of the hares had been killed by predators, and that none of those hares had actually died of starvation, which supported their hypotheses that the predators were killing and depending upon the hares for their food, which supported that boom or bust cycle. Further experiments showed that although fluctuating food availability is not the primary factor that controls the hare population cycles, it does play a very important role. So let's talk a little bit about life history. Life history is looking at the traits that affect an organism's schedule of being able to reproduce and then their death rate. And so key life history traits depend upon the age at which individuals in a population reproduce, the frequency at which individuals in that population reproduce, the number of offspring that individuals in that population produce, and the amount of parental care. And so we're going to look a little bit here at R-selected species and K-selected species. So R-selected species are those that these individuals grow rapidly in unpredictable environments when resources are abundant. So mice, for example, if there is plenty of food available for mice to reproduce and for their babies to survive, they will have a large number of offspring that develop and reproduce, or I'm sorry, reach sexual maturity, which means that they are going to reproduce because their reproduction age is very young. Their gestation period is very, very short. One year I decided, because I had snakes in my classroom and it gets a little bit expensive to go and buy, food for them every week. And so I got this great idea that I was going to go ahead and breed mice in my classroom. So I set up this nice big tank. I had, everything you needed to raise mice. Well, along came Christmas break, and I took a vacation for a week. I'd left plenty of food for my mice, I thought, and I figured they would be fine because I was used to leaving them over the weekend, feed them on Friday, feed them, water them, see them on Monday. Well, I left them a couple more days than that, and when I came back, OMG. What happened was, turns out that mice are very carnivorous, and they will eat each other if they are hungry. And what I came back to was a whole bunch of mice that had no feet, no legs, no arms, no tail, no ears, no noses. It was horrifying. They literally ate the limbs off of each other, stank to high heaven, and well, let's just say that the end of raising mice, that was it. So those are R-selected. Remember, they don't have much of any parental care. Their parental care period is going to be very short. So R-selected are also going to be like the type 3 or type 2 survivorship curves. Now, K-selected. You guys are all K-selected, and you're also type 1 survivorship curve. You tend to be long-lived, such as bears and elephants. You develop slowly. Usually there's only a couple during that are produced during reproduction. Offspring are well cared for some period of time. And these populations are relatively stable, and they're usually maintained right at carrying capacity. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sustainable resource management. Sometimes we have to be involved in what's going on around us to help maintain population sizes. For example, harvesting crops without damaging the resource. We grow food for ourselves, but as a result, we also have crops that are providing food for other groups of organisms. And if we go and destroy all those crops for ourselves, then we leave a population of organisms that are not able to survive. And many populations, it's kind of like a domino effect. If you destroy one population, you destroy other populations. So the deal is also by maintaining high population growth rates, we are able to help replenish populations if you don't wipe them out. According to the logistic growth model, the fastest growth rate occurs when the population size is at roughly half the carrying capacity of a habitat. That means that those populations can make a comeback very, very quickly, and you end up with a population of organisms that's much more stable. If you are damaging a population of individuals and you are wiping them out in totality, then it's going to be very difficult for any of those populations to make a comeback. So, what if, for example, you destroy a whole crop and with that goes all the bees that pollinate your crops? Then, what's going to happen when you plant next year? You have no bee populations because they either died or they moved to somewhere else altogether because you did not maintain that population of bees that pollinate your crop. So fish, for example, are hunted on a large scale and are particularly vulnerable to overharvesting. The Northern Atlantic cod fishery was overfished in 1992 and nearly collapsed. It still is struggling to recover. Resource managers try to provide additional habitats. Sometimes we go out, we sink um, cars, we sink rocks. We sometimes go out and we weld special structures that um, causes the new growth of coral, artificial reefs. That's the word I'm looking for. We go out and we create artificial reefs for coral and sponges and phytoplankton to attach themselves to, because if we can provide artificial places for those organisms to attach, then organisms that depend upon them for food sources will move into the area, and then larger animals will move into the area, and so on. This is what's referred to as biogeography, or creating islands in which organisms can have the resources they need in order to survive and reproduce. So resource managers may provide additional habitats. They may improve the quality of existing habitats to raise the carrying capacity and to help increase population growth. So sometimes during droughts, for example, resource managers may go out and supply troughs of grain, or they might go out and supply containers of water that organisms can use to get through these periods of drought. And then when conditions are better, they'll be able to reproduce and produce more offspring. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about human population. So what's going on in the human population? The human population grew rapidly during the 20th century, and it currently stands at about 7.6 billion people. There is an imbalance in the human population between birth rates and death rates, and this is what is causing population growth. We are currently experiencing exponential growth. The human population is expected to continue this exponential growth for at least the next several decades. And so this is looking at the human population before 1900. We see that our population rate, and this is in billions. See if I can scoot myself over there a little bit more. Oops, that was in billions, and we can see that population numbers in the 1500s, 1600s was fairly low. We see a little bit of a population birth and the growth in the 1700s, 1800s, but look at what happens in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There is exponential growth or rapid growth of the human population that took place. So demographic transition is the shift from zero population growth in which birth rates and death rates are high, but they're roughly equal. This is characterized by low but roughly equal birth and death rates. So when we look at this graph here, what we see is this is over the period of time. This is pre-development. This is high birth rates, falling death rates. This is stable death rates with falling birth rates. And then this is what happens when a population is developed. We get zero population growth, in which our birth rates and our death rates are fairly equal at this point. And so our population numbers tend to be fairly stable. This would be fluctuating between, well, we would call it logistic growth, or those fluctuations at carrying capacity. We right now are experiencing this exponential growth in which our birth rate is outpacing our death rate. Okay, so this is a demographic transition of Mexico, which is projected to approach zero population growth with low birth and death rates in the next few decades. So what we see is that in the 1960s, there was this huge difference in which birth rate was dramatically high and death rate was dramatically low. But what we see is that birth rate starts decreasing, death rate also kind of stabilizes or decreases. And what we're going to see is we're going to see zero population growth, or that's what's projected after 2050. So a pop clock. I don't know if you've ever gone and played with a pop clock. They are pretty cool. I'm going to show you one in just a few minutes, or I'm going to show you the website for it in a minute. In a developing world, death rates normally drop, but birth rates generally persist. And so when we look at populations, this was taken like a year, actually 2 years ago, from the population site. It's run by the US Census. And you can see that these were the 10 most populous countries in the world. And these populations were still growing. We're looking at world population. I want you to notice that it's at 7.2 billion, because as we move to pop clock, we're going to see that at this point in time, look at where our world population stands. It's at 7.6. Here's our 10 most populous countries right here. And these are countries that are still experiencing a greater birth rate than death rate. If we look over to the left, we'll see the population of the United States. We see that every 9 seconds, we have one new little baby born. We have a death approximately every 12 seconds, which shows us that we have more individuals coming into the population than leaving the population. We have one international migrant every 7 seconds, and we have a net gain of one person every 19 seconds, which is phenomenal. Okay. So in, let's see, May 21st, 2020, population size was, wow, look at how many individuals we have added, because today is May 22nd. So in one day, we have added 9,000 individuals approximately. That's huge. Now, on this pop clock site, and you can go to census.gov/popclock/, this is a really kind of a fun, interesting site to play around with. We're going to be talking about these age structures in just a little bit, but this is a age structure here. And what it is showing us as I scroll through here is this would be like the number of individuals that were born. And then this shows the number of individuals in this population. and we are looking at the United States here, the number of individuals that are 27 is larger than the number of individuals that are being born. And then if we go right up here to these baby boomers, we see that there's a fairly large structure here of individuals that are between 55 and let's say about 64, making up the baby boomers. And then we see that there are not very many individuals that are in their 80s and 90s in this age structure. And we'll talk about what that means in just a second. This is just looking at population growth in various parts of the United States, the Northwest, the Midwest, the West, and the South. And, again, looking at population in millions. And we can see that the majority of population is living in the South. We do have individuals living, of course, all over. I find it quite interesting to look at this particular population growth and think that the population is growing larger in the South than it is in the West. And that might be just because I live here in California and I think we have a pretty big population size. All right, so if we look at the most populous states, California, of course, is the most populous state, followed up by Texas, then Florida, then New York. And those probably didn't surprise you. And you can kind of see the other populous states. That also shows us, this also shows us the cities with the highest density. So we're looking at the number of individuals that are in a square mile, kind of like what I mentioned a few slides back, or a number of slides back, about density in LA versus Phelan. And if you look at this, I think it's pretty crazy. LA is not on the list. Anyway, there are some other places you can go when you're playing around with this. You can actually click on various countries and you can go, let's see. We can search a country. Let's see, we can pick, let's pick Russia for the heck of it. If we pick Russia, we can go and this is really great information if you have one of your children that need to do a research project and they need to know, how many individuals live in that area. This gives them a lot of information about, goods being sent into the area or being imported from there to the United States. How many children average are produced by women in the country, so their birth rate. We can compare that to the population of people in the United States. We can compare that to the number of individuals in the world. There's information about trade, exports. Again, you can look at an age structure for that particular country. And we can see that a large number of the individuals living in Russia are in the 30 to 40-year-old range. And then there's kind of a significant in the 55 to 65 range there as well. And then we'll talk about what that means in just a little bit. All right. So again, go check it out. Population clock, check out countries that you're interested in, play around with it. There's a lot to be discovered there. All right, so this is kind of what I was just going through with the pop clock. This is information that's available on that website. So, all right, so here's these age structure diagrams that I was pointing out. So this is showing us the number of individuals in different age groups and the effects it has on the future growth of a population. Because if you think about it, these 0 to 4-year-olds eventually are going to be 40, 50, 60 years old. What is that age structure going to look like in 50 years? And ecologists can predict what this is going to look like later in time. Fertility rate, of course, is the average number of children produced by a woman in her lifetime. Population momentum is the continued growth that occurs despite any kind of reduction in fertility rate due to replacement level. So the result of girls, for example, in the 0 to 14 age group of a previously expanding population, when they reach their childbearing years, what are we going to see? We're going to see that those individuals are going to replace the previous individuals that were of childbearing age, and now they are going to be producing an increasing population size. So that will increase the momentum of that population replacement. All right, so these age structure diagrams show us the population growth trends. They are important for looking at social conditions. That's why you hear so much about the baby boomers, Generation X, and so on, because as populations expand, this allows us to predict the need for schools, the need for employment, the need for various infrastructure. And when you end up with a larger elderly population, we're going to have to devote resources for their health care. We're going to have to resort to building facilities that are going to be able to house and take care of them. And so this, once again, these are these age structure. And if you look at these, they're dramatically different. This one, we see that their birth rate is lower than those in the 30 to 34 range. So what happens is as these age, these individuals are aging as well. That means that these individuals are going to create a wider range up here later on. But these individuals are also going to be replacing individuals in the population. And so we're going to see a wider range of individuals in this mid-range. And so these age structure diagrams, if we start in 1989, this is predicting it's showing what happened in 2012, and it's predicting what we expect that age structure to look like in 2035. And if we look at this, we're like seeing a lot of stability in which our birth rate and death rate are going to come together and be equal. And at this point in time, we're going to be seeing more of a logistic pattern of growth rather than this exponential growth that we are seeing and experiencing now. So the U.S. Census Bureau, and this is why it's important that you fill out those questionnaires, because the Census Bureau is creating these models based on your responses and building infrastructures and funneling money where we need it to support those changes that are occurring in population. The projection is that there will be 8 billion people within the next 20 years. And if you look back, and we know that in one day we've added 9,000 people, you can see that that's going to probably be sooner than 20 years. They're projecting 9.5 billion people by mid-21st century. So the question is, do we have enough resources to sustain 8 or 9 billion people? That means in order to accommodate all the people that are expected to live on our planet by 2025, we are going to have to double our food production. That's pretty crazy, because there is a difference of 10 billion people here. So what is an ecological footprint? This is the estimated amount of land that is required to provide all of the raw materials that an individual or a nation consumes, including all the food that that population or that individual is going to need, all of the fuel that that population or individual is going to need, and all of the shelter or the housing that that individual is going or population is going to need in order to survive. So comparing our demand for resources with Earth's capacity to renew those resources, or what we refer to as biocapacity, helps to give us a broad view of human activities and their sustainability. The total area of ecological productive land in the United States can be divided by the global population, which works out to be that you have about 1.8 global hectares that are required for everybody on this planet to have all of the resources that they need. So 1 hectare equals 2.47 acres. A global hectare is a hectare with the world average ability to, again, produce all the resources and, importantly, absorb the waste material that is produced by those individuals in the population. So this is just looking at a projection of ecological footprint in the world. And we see that this is the built up land. This is the projected carbon footprint, or the amount of individuals that this land can support. And again, this is looking at biocapacity again, or that carbon footprint. And it's looking at the population of individuals living in different countries and the global hectare that is needed per person in that population. So here's us at 7 point, I don't know, what do you say? It's 7.2 hectares per person that's needed by the global or the population of individuals in the United States. All right, so you should be able at this point to define a population and what it means to talk about population ecology. You should be able to define density in a population and the type 1, type 2, type 3 dispersion patterns. I'm sorry, the clumped, the random, and the clumped, random, and clumped, random, and uniform dispersion patterns. You should be able to talk about type 1, type 2 survivorship curves. You should be able to tell the difference between R selected and K selected. You should be able to tell me the difference between logistical growth and exponential growth, what carrying capacity is. You should be able to tell me what kind of factors regulate density dependent, density independent factors. What's a boom or bust cycle? How do they occur? Why do they occur? Give me an example. You should be able to explain life history traits. Those would be those traits for R selected, K selected. And you should be able to describe some of the major challenges that occur when we try to manage populations, or the reasons why we have to manage populations. Explain how the structure of the world's human population has changed and continues to change. Explain what an age structure is and how it can be used to predict changes in population sizes and social conditions. Explain what an ecological or carbon footprint is. And I again, want to urge you, if you have any questions, make sure you contact me, and make sure you tune in for part 3 of our ecology lecture so that you don't miss anything. And I will see you later. Bye.